What started as an unremarkable phone call would soon transform into a moment of unforgettable emotional power. When President Ibrahim Traoré reached out to Steve Harvey with an unexpected and sincere message, nobody could have predicted that the celebrated television personality would be moved to tears. Steve's visceral reaction, a mixture of profound gratitude, unvarnished sincerity, and pure humanity, has touched the hearts of millions. This was more than just a conversation. It was a testament to the influence of truth, mutual respect, an authentic human connection that transcends cultures and defies generational divides. The evening was calm in Atlanta. Steve Harvey had just wrapped up a taping of his show, Family Feud, sinking into his office chair and loosening his tie. He was idly browsing his phone when a call from an unfamiliar international number appeared on the screen. His first instinct was to ignore it, but an inexplicable urge prompted him to answer. "Hello," Steve said, a note of caution in his voice. The voice that responded was serene, composed, and exuded a deep sense of humility. "Good evening, Mr. Harvey. My name is Ibrahim Traoré, and I am the President of Burkina Faso." For a second, Steve suspected it was a prank call, but the genuine quality in the young leader's voice quickly dispelled his doubt. "Sir, my reason for calling is not political. I am calling because I am convinced that voices such as yours possess a kind of influence that our world often overlooks." A tightness formed in Steve's chest. He leaned forward, listening in silence, completely unaware that his own life and the perspectives of millions were on the verge of a profound shift. Steve cleared his throat, still trying to process the situation. "Mr. President, I'm not even sure how you obtained my personal number," Traoré let out a soft chuckle. When a person speaks their truth to millions, the world has a way of creating a path to them. His tone then shifted, becoming more serious. "Mr. Harvey, I have observed you inspiring young men and women to have faith in their own potential. I have watched you weep on television while sharing your personal hardships, and I decided that if I ever had the chance to speak with you." Steve was motionless. His hands began to tremble. Traoré went on, "I am the leader of a nation that is struggling for its future. Your words have managed to travel across oceans. And this evening, I simply wanted you to be aware that you have instilled hope in people you may never have the chance to meet." Tears began to film Steve's eyes. He whispered, "You have no idea what this means to me." But Ibrahim Traoré did know, and that was the very reason he had made the call. For a few moments, his composure, but the emotional force of Traoré's words struck him more deeply than he had anticipated. "You know," Steve began softly, "people see the designer suits, the television shows, the constant smiles, but they are not witness to the nights I spent praying to God, begging Him not to lose faith in me." There was a pause from the other end of the line. Then Traoré's voice came through, low and unwavering. "I see your reality, Steve, and I am listening." Steve covered his face with one hand, shaking his head slowly. "Man, you are breaking me down right now." Miles away, across an ocean, Ibrahim closed his eyes. "Then let yourself be broken, Steve, because it is often in our moments of breaking that we discover our truth." With laughter sat in stunned silence, completely disarmed by the sincerity of a young leader from halfway around the world. And this was just the start of a week that would bring the world to tears. The line remained quiet for a moment longer as both men fought to contain their emotions. Then Ibrahim Traoré spoke once more. "Steve, in my country of Burkina Faso, we have very little. Many of our children must walk for miles to get to school, often without shoes on their feet. Mothers are forced to sell the few possessions they have simply to provide a meal for their families. And yet, when they laugh, their laughter is genuine. When they hope, their hope is powerful. You serve as a reminder to them that faith is strong, enough to move mountains." Steve leaned back into his chair, his hands still covering his face. His chest heaved with emotion. "Man, you just don't know," Steve whispered. "I started with nothing. 2, I slept in my car. I prayed for just 1, opportunity. And now you're telling me that people over there are listening to me, that I am giving them a reason to hope." "Yes," Traoré affirmed. Steve pressed a tissue to his eyes. The realization that his voice had impacted lives he had never known existed shook him to his core. For the first time in a very long while, Steve felt that his own struggles had not been without purpose. "Traoré, paused before continuing, his tone softening. "My father," he said quietly, "he told me before he passed away, to never forget the men and women who use their platforms to elevate others. He said that even if they don't know your name, they are carrying your story. Tonight, I am honoring my father by telling you this. You are one of those men." Steve's lips began to tremble. He could no longer restrain himself. A profound sob broke from his throat. "I lost my father, too," Steve choked out. "He never lived to see me succeed, but I always wanted to make him proud." The line fell silent again as both men were enveloped by the weight of their shared memories. Then Traoré's calm voice gently broke the quiet. "Perhaps they can see us two men from two different worlds, demonstrating that dignity and truth still have meaning." Steve was now weeping without restraint. "Brother, you have no idea what you've just done for me." But the reality was, Ibrahim knew precisely what he was doing. Steve reached for another tissue, his face streaked with tears. His producer, who had slipped quietly into the office, stopped in his tracks at the sight of the famously resilient and joyful Steve Harvey, completely undone by emotion. "Are you okay, Steve?" the producer whispered. Steve simply waved a hand at him. Just give me a moment. "Steve, tonight is not about television programs or celebrity. It is about truth. And truth, my brother, will endure long after we are gone." Steve closed his eyes. The phone call that had started as a complete surprise had evolved into something far more significant, something almost sacred. "Mr. President," Steve said, his voice quivering, "the world needs more leaders like you, leaders who are not afraid to speak from the heart, that even after being broken, it is possible to rise again." As the call concluded, Steve sat in silence, tears continuing to fall. Neither man was aware of it yet, but that deeply personal moment, secretly captured on video, was about to spread across the internet, moving millions to tears, and the week had only just begun. Steve assumed the exchange would remain a private matter. It was, after all, just a phone call, intimate, raw, and entirely spontaneous. But the young producer who had been standing in the corner had recorded the entire conversation. His motive was not one of disrespect, but a profound conviction that the world needed to witness such a genuine display of humanity. By the next morning, the clip had made its way online. Within a matter of hours, it had become a global phenomenon. People were astonished to see Steve Harvey, the icon of laughter and fortitude, wiping away tears as he listened to the composed, heartfelt words of President Ibrahim Traoré. "Who is this African leader who speaks with such power?" one person wrote on Twitter. Another responded, "That's not a politician, that's a brother speaking from his soul. I'm in tears." In Burkina Faso, thousands of people gathered in cafes, bustling markets, and private homes. Watching the clip on the small screens of their phones, many of them wiped away tears of their own, filled with pride that their leader's words had resonated so deeply across the world. But Steve had not yet grasped the full extent of the phone call's reach, or how profoundly it would change him. By midday, Steve's phone was buzzing incessantly. Friends, colleagues, and people he had never met were all sending him the same video clip that he had lived through just hours earlier. "Steve, I just watched this. Man, you brought me to tears. Brother, that president. Wow, who speaks with that kind of sincerity anymore? You gave us all hope today. Thank you." Steve sat at his kitchen table, feeling completely overwhelmed. He scrolled through thousands of comments from people in Africa, Asia, Europe, and even small towns across America, all sharing how the video had affected them. One message, however, stood out. It was from a single mother in Detroit. "Mr. Harvey, I watched you cry last night. For the first time in many years, I found myself praying again. Thank you." Steve stared at her words, his eyes filling with tears. Once more, he whispered to himself, "God, is this what you intended?" Meanwhile, across the ocean in Ouagadougou, President Traoré's advisors were encouraging him to release a formal statement. But Traoré simply shook his head. "No," he said, "the truth requires no embellishment. Let the people feel it." And feel it they did, deeply. Late that night, Steve found it impossible to sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, his heart still heavy with the emotions of the day. Finally, he reached for his phone and dialed the private number that Traoré had given him. The line rang once, then twice. A calm, steady voice answered. "Steve, I had a feeling you would call." Steve let out a small laugh through the tears that were already forming again. "Brother, you have managed to turn my entire life upside down. With a single phone call, I just had to hear your voice again." Traoré laughed softly in response. "It was not me, Steve. It was truth. And truth always finds its way home." Steve swallowed hard. "Man, you have the whole world crying. But as for me, you have me rethinking my entire perspective on life." There was a brief silence. Then Traoré said quietly, "Good, because the world doesn't need more laughter on its own. It needs healing. And healing begins with honesty." Steve closed his eyes, his grip on the phone tightening. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain: this conversation was far from over. The next morning, Steve walked into his studio, expecting the usual business of the day. But instead of the typical sounds of jokes and light chatter, he was greeted by a profound silence. His entire production crew was standing there, waiting for him. One of his producers, her eyes still puffy from crying, whispered, "Steve, we all saw the call. None of us have been the same since." Steve glanced around the room at the cameramen, writers, and assistants, and saw in all of their eyes something he hadn't witnessed in a very long time: hope. He cleared his throat, struggling to hold back his own tears. "Family," he said softly, "you all witnessed what truth looks like. That man, that leader. He reminded me that words spoken from a place of sincerity have the power to change the world." A stagehand timidly raised his hand. "Mr. Harvey, do you think it would be possible to bring him on the show?" Steve froze. The idea hadn't even occurred to him, but the thought of President Ibrahim Traoré speaking directly to his audience filled him with a mixture of immense excitement and trepidation. He finally gave a slow nod, his voice trembling as he said, "Let's make that call." Contacting a sitting head of state was no small feat, but Steve's team dedicated themselves to the task, making countless calls, sending messages, and pursuing every possible avenue. Finally, late that evening, Steve's assistant hurried into his office. He said, "Yes." Steve blinked in disbelief. "Wait, you're talking about President Traoré?" She nodded, a smile breaking through her own tears. "He said he would be honored to join a live broadcast. He said the people deserve to hear the truth, not scripted speeches, but words from the heart." Steve sank into his chair completely. Overcome, he whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. The announcement spread across the internet like a wildfire. Headlines everywhere exploded with the news: Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré to speak live on The Steve Harvey Show. Following emotional call, Steve Harvey and President Traoré set for historic broadcast. Comments flooded in. Some people were curious, others were skeptical, but the overwhelming majority were deeply moved. One person wrote, "This isn't about politics, this is about humanity. I will be watching." As the countdown to the broadcast began, Steve couldn't shake the powerful feeling that something truly historic was about to take place. The night before the broadcast, Steve sat by himself in his study. The lights were low, and the house was still. He replayed the sound of Ibrahim Traoré's voice in his mind, calm, strong, and imbued with a kind of truth Steve had seldom encountered in his life. Then, his phone buzzed. It was a text message. From Traoré himself: "Brother Steve, tomorrow is not about you or me. It is about the world remembering that dignity and respect are more powerful than fear. Rest well." Steve set his phone down and rubbed at his eyes, which were already moist. With tears, he whispered to himself, "God, please grant me the strength not to break down on live television tomorrow." But deep down, he knew he probably would, because some truths are simply not meant to be spoken without tears. As Steve finally drifted into sleep, millions of people all over the world were setting reminders for the broadcast. None of them could have known it yet. But the following day was destined to leave the world forever changed. The day of the broadcast dawned, and it felt as though the entire world had paused in anticipation. News channels on every continent ran reports on the historic live call. Steve Harvey and President Ibrahim Traoré in homes from Chicago to Ouagadougou, families gathered around their screens. Some were drawn by curiosity, others by skepticism. but all were captivated by the mystery of what was about to happen. Backstage, Steve tried to steady his nerves. His palms were slick with sweat, and his heart was pounding. His longtime producer leaned in and whispered, "Steve, no matter what happens out there, just speak from your heart." When the countdown began 5, 4, 3, the studio lights blazed to life, and millions of viewers tuned in. Steve managed to smile, but inwardly, he was already holding back tears. "This is not a regular show today," he told the audience, his voice soft. "This is something bigger." Then, the enormous screen behind him came to life, and there he was, President Ibrahim Traoré, composed, dignified, his eyes carrying the unmistakable weight of truth. The world held its collective breath. The very first words from Traoré brought a hush over the room. "Brother Steve, and to everyone who is watching," he began, "I have come as a man, a son, a father, and a brother." Steve swallowed hard, already losing his battle with his emotions. Traoré continued, "Our world is wounded, not from a lack of wealth or power, but because we have forgotten the importance of dignity. Dignity is not something that is bestowed by riches. It is found in how we see one another as human beings who are worthy of respect." The audience was captivated, frozen in their seats. Some people quietly wiped away tears. He spoke of figures like Chadwick Boseman and Viola Davis, and of the countless men and women who carry truth in their hearts even when the world fails to see it. Then, he looked directly into the camera. "To my brothers and sisters watching, in America, in Africa, and in every corner of this earth, do not let anyone convince you that your voice, your worth, or your story is insignificant." Steve's eyes overflowed. He whispered, "My God," the world was weeping. Steve attempted to speak, but his voice cracked. He covered his face, unable to maintain his composure. The audience began to applaud softly, a gentle encouragement. Finally, he managed to say, "President Traoré, you didn't just speak to me. You spoke to every single soul who is watching." I don't know what to say," Traoré smiled gently. "You do not need to say much, Steve. Sometimes, our tears are the most honest words we have." At that moment, Steve completely broke down. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "Thank you for reminding me of what truly matters." Across the globe, people cried along with him. Comment sections on social media erupted with messages. "I'm sobbing. This is what humanity needs." I have never seen Steve Harvey like this before. Backstage, even the most seasoned crew members were crying, and as the broadcast went on, it became abundantly clear that this was no longer just a television show. It was a moment in history. The moment the call concluded, a profound silence fell over the studio. There was no music, no applause, just silence. Steve sat motionless, his tears soaking into the fabric of his suit. For the first time in his decades-long career, he was at a complete loss for words to end the show. He looked out at the audience, his eyes red and swollen. An elderly woman in the crowd rose to her feet and began to clap a slow, steady rhythm, her hands trembling. Then another person stood, and another, until the entire room, black, white, young, and old, was on its feet, offering a silent, tearful, standing ovation. There was no cheering, only a raw, unadulterated appreciation. Backstage, producers were weeping. One whispered into the communication system, "Let it run. Don't cut to a commercial." Across the world, viewers started uploading their own reaction videos. TikToks, Instagram Reels, YouTube short stares were flowing everywhere. One comment read, "I am a grown man in Nigeria, crying at 2 a.m. Thank you, Ibrahim Traoré," another said. "This is the healing we didn't even know we needed." This had transcended entertainment. It had become a movement. The following morning, Steve Harvey awoke to thousands of messages, but one letter from a 14-year-old girl in Baltimore stood out from the rest. She wrote, "Dear Mr. Harvey, last night I saw my dad cry for the very first time. He said that President Traoré reminded him of his own father, who passed away. Thank you for allowing us to feel something real. I want to learn more about Africa now." Steve held the letter to his chest, his hands still trembling. Later that day, he posted a short video online. "I have received many awards in my life," he said, "but what happened last night? That is the greatest honor I have ever known. President Traoré, you didn't just talk to me. You reached my soul." Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, Traoré was photographed at a community event, embracing an elderly woman in a rural village. He made no mention of the broadcast. There was no press conference, no camera crew, only sincerity. And that sincerity resonated more loudly than any news headline. By the end of the week, global news outlets were calling it the moment that united millions. Steve Harvey extended an invitation to President Traoré to appear on a future special edition of his show, not as a politician, but as a man of the heart. In the final seconds of the week-long media coverage, Steve shared one last message with the world. You don't need a crown to speak like a king. Sometimes all it takes is truth, spoken from a heart that remembers where it came from. And as the credits began to roll, soft music played over a montage of images, children in the United States and Burkina Faso writing letters to one another, painting flags, and holding up signs that read, respect, truth, love. History had been made not by noise, but by tears. Now we turn to you, our dear viewer. If this story has touched you, if it made you cry or reflect, please like this video so that others may have the chance to experience it as well. Subscribe to our channel because we are dedicated to telling real stories that heal, unite, and inspire. And please, leave a comment below and tell us how this moment made you feel. Whether you are in Texas or Tanzania, Atlanta or Accra, your voice is important. Let the world know that truth still has the power to move hearts, that connection still matters, and that tears can still change lives.